You're listening to Season 2 of the Mies podcast. I'm your host, Josh Sharkey, the founder and CEO of Mies, a culinary operating system for food professionals. On the show, we're going to talk to high performers in the food business, everything from chefs to CEOs, technologists, writers, investors, and more, about how they innovate and operate and how they consistently execute at a high level, day after day. And I would really love it if you could drop us a 5-star review anywhere that you listen to your podcast. That could be Apple, that could be Spotify, could be Google. I'm not picky. Anywhere works, but I really appreciate the support. And as always, I hope you enjoy the show. With every stroke of the pencil, I'm giving you folks a glimpse into my experiences. Hey, ladies and gentlemen, today's guest, if I time this right, is literally having a baby this week. We're trying to have it so that he can listen to this episode and maybe watch it before he was a dad and then after. This is Chef Opie Crooks, and he's one of the nicest people you'll meet. You know, the first time that I met Opie, we were doing an event in DC at the Line Hotel, and I was sponsoring a breakfast, and he was cooking it. And first of all, his food was delicious, but he was hosting a bunch of incredible chefs from around the country for this event. And he couldn't have been more gracious with his kitchen, with his space, with his time. And right away, I was like, man, this is just such a class act kind of person. He has since moved down south to Savannah, Georgia, and he is overseeing culinary for a hospitality group called Farm Hospitality Group. They have a number of really great concepts. And well, you know, we did spend some time just kind of generally catching up. Funny enough, he was in his car for this conversation because, well, you know what it's like running a restaurant and finding space for some quiet that doesn't have generators and condensers running. So I was appreciative of that. And anyways, we just had a good time catching up. We talked a lot about what it's like growing a hospitality group and becoming the culinary director and starting to sort of manage all of these chefs and making sure that the metric of success for yourself is how successful and happy and productive and innovative the chefs that work with you are. So it was great to hear his story and just sort of his trajectory of how he's gotten to where he is. I think you'll just enjoy, of course, relating to that. And I'm just really grateful to have had the time with Opie before he became a dad, because he'll probably not have a lot of time for the next few months. Anyways, thanks, Opie. Congratulations. And I hope that everybody here enjoys this episode as much as I did. Good to see you, man. What are you up to today?
Today, I'm over at our new bakery / supper club floor in Fauna. Got here in the morning, checked in on breakfast, had a meeting with Chef Brandon, who's the owner, founder of the group that I'm a partner in. Had a quick catch up, and now I'm talking to you, and then I'll be working service tonight, and we're going to knock it out. And then all of our restaurants are closed for the 4th of July. So that's super nice. And everybody's looking forward to a little reprieve. So
nice, man. Well, I do have a bunch of questions about Farm Hospitality Group because we couldn't find a ton of information on it, but I'm going to ask you a bunch about that. But, you know, just because we've met in person a few times and chatted a bunch, I just wanted this opportunity selfishly to just learn more about your background. I know like your cooking background because you can just Google that and find where you worked. You worked for Spike for a long time. Was that? But like, where are you from? Like, how did you get into all this? I don't know any of that.
Yeah, I grew up in Nashville, started working in restaurants when I was a kid and fell in love with it. And, you know, I realized that the chances of me playing professional sports were few and far between. So it was like, I took that same kind of tenacity that I had for sports and translated in the kitchen and, you know, just started trying to work at the best places that I could. And, you know, the rest is kind of history, you know, just head down and, you know, honing the craft is kind of what I was always chasing and just trying to do. I was a big baseball player.
Gotcha. Still play?
No, never. I don't even really watch it, except for the Savannah Bananas, you know?
What's that?
So the Savannah Bananas is the local baseball team. It's more of a show than it is baseball now. They have their own, like, they call it banana ball, but there's like lots of singing and dancing, and it's like a real showmanship situation. It's pretty amazing to watch.
It sounds kind of like the Harlem Globetrotters of Savannah baseball.
It's the Harlem Globetrotters of baseball, exactly. You know, like people will do like trick plays, like they'll hit a ball to the outfield and the guy will do a backflip before he catches it.
That's awesome.
Pretty fun. Yeah.
I met you in DC. You were at the a Rake's Progress at the Line Hotel.
Right.
So obviously Nashville, DC, I think you obviously bounce around some more as well, but I'm curious about the Savannah scene. What is the culinary community like in Savannah?
It's really good. It's a really tight-knit community. I think that the restaurant scene is really growing. I think that there's a lot of really good chefs that came from major markets. Andrew Brochu opened up Brochu's family tradition. He came from the Alinea group. Kyle Giacovino has Vittoria Pizza, which is right next door to Flora and Fauna, and he worked, for Hugh Atchison for a long time. Chris Hathcock, he goes by Chino, worked with Ryan Smith at Empire State South, and, he worked for Sean, and he was the chef at Huss for a long time. So there's also more chefs that I'm probably leaving out. Brandon, who's the chef and founder of our group, was with the Ritz-Carlton for a really long time, in Naples, and, a lot of the really old school, hardcore kind of French style Ritz-Carlton dining room areas. So there's a lot of energy in Savannah. It's like Charleston was a few years ago. I'm imagining. I wasn't there, but that's what I've been told. And, it's just really fun. And, it's not as cutthroat as a DC as I would say. Chefs are super open. Everyone is, super friendly and, willing to share, best practices or, what's going on or business levels or, everything like that. So,
yeah. Are there spots that everybody goes to after work?
Yeah, there are. Yeah. There's a bar called Over Yonder, and it's kind of a Western themed bar, and I think they have the best burger in town. So definitely the place to go.
You also spent much time just in Georgia working, actually, I think it was a decade, right? For Roy, was that right? Before you?
Yeah, I worked for Roy kind of all over the place. I worked for him in Atlanta. I worked for him in Florida, in Jacksonville Beach, Florida. And then I traveled around with him a lot, doing LA Food and Wine Festival. If there was a dinner on the East Coast that he was cooking at, somewhere in Florida, I would generally be there. So
Roy Yamaguchi for we didn't really preface that, but
and then I finished with Roy's in Baltimore, and that's how I ended up in Baltimore.
What was it like working with for Roy's for a decade?
It was great. I think at the time, the balance of, corporate systems and cooking techniques that were, mandatory and really kind of I guess beaten into you was it was the perfect balance for me, because there was all this structure around how you could improve. There were a lot of rules as to what you could and could not do, because at the time Roy's was owned by Outback Steakhouse. So it had kind of all the corporate structure with kind of Roy's vision for the food. So for me, I learned, how to process a P&L, how to read a P&L, how to really dive deep into P&L. I had to send an email every morning when I was a chef partner that was hey, we're going to spend, $1,400 on labor today. We're going to do this many covers. This is what the sales are going to be. And, that's the plan for the day. And if it was off by $100 or more, my phone would ring the next morning by 9 a.m. And if you did better, if you spent $100 less, it'd be hey, why'd you spend $100 less?
Yeah.
And you'd be the first time I was oh, I don't really know. And this is in, the early 2000s. So it's it was $11 an hour. So it's well, what did someone do for 9 hours?
Yeah.
And I'm well, I don't know. Well, what do you mean you don't know? You don't know what one person did for 9 hours? And I'd be all right. So then that really got me.
Who was that? Who was that person that was asking you that?
His name's Mark Anders.
But I mean, the role, what was that? Was that the controller? Was it?
His title was joint venture partner, kind of like a regional manager, if you will.
Yeah. I didn't realize Roy's was owned by Outback, and still owned by Outback?
No, not at all.
So they divested, or how did that work?
I'm not sure how it all went down, but I believe that Bloomin' Brands, which was Outback, became Bloomin' Brands, sold it to a private equity group.
Ah, gotcha.
And I think cool. Roy was not involved anymore. And then there's only a couple of them left.
Yeah.
On the mainland. He's still doing it in Hawaii in a pretty big way. So
yeah. So that's crazy, by the way. So you would essentially forecast the sales for the next day and then based on that, you'd also say, here's how much I want to spend on a daily basis. You did that?
Daily basis.
That's crazy.
Well, you had to forecast it for the month. There was like this crazy spreadsheet. And like, so you did like your food sales forecast, your daily labor forecast, as a projection. And then like the day of, you could go in and change it and be like, hey, this is what I'm actually going to spend today because, hey, we picked up a party. Hey, business is down. Hey, we're trending down 2%. So I got to spend less on labor, And then you would plug in what it is, email it. And then like at the end of the night, the closing manager would put what the actual was, send it off. And
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember doing the same often, but typically it was like a flash report that was just like generated on like, like a trailing 12 week. You would just get the forecast for the next week based on the trailing 12. And I've never heard of it done manually. That's pretty cool. But how accurate were you?
It was pretty accurate. I would say that it was within like a couple points. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And what did you use? Like, how did you forecast a month? Did you also just use like a trailing 12 week, or like, how did you come up with like
trailing 12 week, and then like historical data, this month versus last year versus 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Plus the trailing 12 week. And then you're just, you're obviously making the best educated guess you can.
Yeah. It's so interesting because there's a lot of AI technology or machine learning technology now. It's like forecasting revenue.
Right. And now.
Yeah. Now, but you just said you're, a couple of points up, 98% accuracy is.
Right.
That's better than any AI model.
Right.
Do you do that today with your restaurants?
No, we don't do that.
No.
I mean, we have a lot of tools and like, we definitely manage proactively, but like, we're more interested in like the chefs cooking delicious food for our guests than like them being, kind of like inundated with like a spreadsheet and, they obviously have a cost and schedule, and I review their cost and schedule every Thursday. And, we talk about it. We talk about the plan for the week, and then we execute the plan, get to the end of the month and be like, oh, labor's 60%. What are we going to do?
Yeah. Well, and by the way, I forgot to say this, but I wanted to say it earlier when we start chatting, is that like I'm kind of anchoring this call on you being a dad in like 2 months.
Yeah, 2 months, literally 2 months.
I looked at the schedule and I think this is supposed to go out in like, I don't know, like end of August or early September, but I want to time it so that it goes out like right close to when you're supposed to be a dad. So
September 19th.
So you could have a little archive of like, here's before, after.
Yeah, here's before.
September 19th? Okay, I'm right.
Yeah.
Tell me about the restaurant you're working for.
So Farm Hospitality Group, Brandon Carter and Ryan Williamson, who's our founders, they started the group with Farm, about 8 years ago. Brandon was the chef at Palmetto Bluff, which is a really high-end, resort hotel operation out here. And Ryan was selling him produce at the restaurant and at the resort. And Ryan was like, hey, I really want to open this restaurant in Bluffton. And Brandon was just kind of like, yeah, I'm not really interested. Ryan was like, why don't you design the kitchen for me? And then like, once you design the kitchen, you're like, this could be really amazing. The rest is history. Farm opened, very successful restaurant in Bluffton, South Carolina, focused on, cooking with the landscape of the Low Country, using local purveyors. They have a wood-fired oven. So that was all, kind of what attracted me there. About 3 years ago, they opened Common Thread, Savannah. Ryan's originally from Savannah, so they always had a desire to come to this market. 2 years ago, we opened Wildflower Cafe in the Telfair Museum. That was Annie's introduction to the company. Annie's my wife, for the people that are on the podcast that don't know. So we opened Wildflower Cafe. There's no hood there. It's just like, a couple panini presses, a really small, ventless convection oven. And, we do really delicious sandwiches and salads and grain bowls and kind of healthier fare for the museum goers. And then we opened Strange Bird, which started as a food truck during COVID. We opened it as a brick and mortar, and it's kind of like a Latin inspired barbecue, tacos, burritos. But then we kind of take the Strange and tap other cuisines. There's some Asian influence, there's some Middle Eastern influence, and, it's a lot of fun using, local products to kind of showcase what can be done with them.
Yeah.
And then we just opened Flora and Fauna about 60 days ago. I'm in the old back in the day bakery space where Cheryl Day and Griff Day operated for 22 years. Their last service was on Valentine's Day, and we opened 60 days later. So
Wow, that's crazy.
we really flipped it.
And Annie's there as well, right?
Annie's the executive chef of Flora and Fauna. So in the morning, it's bakery, breakfast, lunch, and then at night, we change to a supper club. The dining room kind of doesn't change, but it does shift and the vibe switches. And we do a prefix menu, 3-course prefix menu for $55.
Yeah. I'm curious now, like your role as a culinary director. You have all these executive chefs and chef probably in these restaurants. Like, what's your day-to-day like?
We're mid-opening right now. So Brandon and I are both living at Flora and Fauna, making sure that we get systems in place, making sure that we get, costs in line pretty quickly, making sure that, our chefs are executing the vision. And then, I kind of play the field a little bit. Like, I like to check in on everybody. So I'll stop by each restaurant, see how everyone's doing. And then if someone is needing more help, maybe they have, a sous chef that needs a little bit more mentoring, or maybe they have, they're wanting to do a dish for a wine dinner and they need some help with the technique. Like, I kind of make myself available to go and put out the fires. And like, if someone calls out for their shift, like, I'll generally slide over and cover, or if someone goes on vacation, I cover the restaurant. We just changed chefs at Farm. A few months ago, we hired a really good chef from Atlanta, but during the transition for the 4 months that we were without a chef, I was essentially the chef there.
Yeah.
And so plug and play.
How do you interface with all the chefs? I mean, are you, obviously it sounds like you're developing, new menu items with them, and you're also stepping in on the line when needed. But do you all work on like growth, on like learning more? Like, what part of that is?
Absolutely. I think, I check in every morning with most of the chefs. Like, we have a text thread, and, we get a nightly recap. Hey, this was great. Hey, this was not great. This was the team. So-and-so did well. So-and-so did not do well. Hey, we really have to focus on, line checks this week because, Scarlett ran out of beats on her station last night at 8:45 on the last turn. Like, I got that last night. This morning, I touched base with the chefs. I'm like, hey, let's make sure that we get some real good energy around line checks this week. Let's make sure that we're grabbing Kelly, who's, one of our junior sous chefs, and like making sure that he's getting in there and like getting his hands in it as well, and making sure that we're pushing him to do the things that we need him to do to step up to be a leader. So
this show is brought to you by, you guessed it, Mies. Mies helps thousands of restaurants and food service businesses all over the world build profitable menus and scale their business successfully. If you're looking to organize your recipe IP and train your team to put out consistent product every day in less time than ever before, then Mies is just for you. And you can transform all those old Google Docs and Word docs and PDFs and spreadsheets and Google Sheets into dynamic, actionable recipes in Mies in lightning speed. Plus, stop all that manual work of processing invoices, because Mies will digitize all your purchases automatically. And there's a built-in database of ingredient yields, prep yields, and unit of measure conversions for every ingredient, which means you're going to get laser-accurate food costs in a fraction of the time. Visit www.getmees.com. That's GETMEEZ.com to learn more. And check out the show notes moving forward, because we're going to be adding promotions and discount codes so that all of you lovely and brilliant Mies podcast listeners get a sweet deal on Mies. Yeah. Independent of sort of like the day-to-day improvements in the operation, are there things that like you do or you do with your team to just grow and learn outside of the things that you're doing? I always find like we get older, we start like, now we're like running businesses and managing lots of people, and a lot of time is spent on that. I'm always like super curious how everybody continues to learn the things that you were learning before. Like, does everybody buy books together? Are you going out? Like what?
Right. Like, I have like a handful of books that I really like. One of them is called Work Clean. I actually think they changed the name of it. I don't think it's called that anymore, but it's by this author. His name's Dan Charnas. And it's not really a book for chefs. It's more of a book about chefs and about mise en place. And it's kind of like teaches people that work in an office how chefs work. You know what I mean? Because like we work in this very specific way where like most things are black and white. You know what I mean? Like you're going to come in, you have to have your prep done by this specific time because we're going to open. And like whether or not like you meet that deadline or not is not like optional. Like it, you know, in an office work, it's like, oh, hey, you know, I'm a little bit behind today. I didn't get the deadline by 5 o'clock. Like someone's like, oh, okay. Like, you know, we'll just get it going tomorrow. But for us in the kitchen, there is no tomorrow. So I really like that. I'm a big fan of Audible because I spend a lot of time in the car driving to Bluffton. That's how I love listening to your podcast, obviously. So your podcast is on my rotation, and then books on Audible.
Nice.
Is in the heavy rotation.
Actually, I was just talking about this with my team yesterday, or my I don't remember if my CS, my sales team, of just, you know, ownership. There's so many lessons I feel like in the kitchen that translate really well to any industry. Mise en place is obviously like king, right? Like being prepared.
Right.
But, you know, I was telling them yesterday about, you know, owning your station, right? So like if you're the saucier at, you know, whatever, restaurant X, right? Like
right.
Everything about that station you own. It's your temple, right? How clean is it? How organized is it? Where is it stocked? Where does this stuff live? Like, how are you placing things so that it's, you know, it's efficient? Like that's yours. And you train someone else in that station. It's like you're a little micro business. And I think it's a pretty cool part about like being a cook, right? Is you get this little micro business in a way, right? Like you got to make sure that like all the stuff that you need to get ordered gets ordered for that. I mean, if it's that type of kitchen, right? And everything that has to do with your station, if you're the poissonnier or the saucier, or whatever the name is, depending on, you know, if it's American, obviously different names, but you kind of become, you know, the manager or the CEO of your little business. And that's really translatable to, and I think that what's interesting is it doesn't come across that way in other industries sometimes, at least like the perspective doesn't come that way. Where like if you have a job as a whatever, right? Like you have a boss and they tell you what to do and you have your instructions and you follow them and that's kind of, you know, and you have your metric of success and then that's it. And everything outside of that purview is like, that's not really my job. Not to say that you're not working hard, or that you don't want to do more, but like you have this sort of box. And I feel like what's cool about kitchens is when you have a station, that box is kind of everything. I don't know if you agree, but
no, 100%. The dish room is your station, you know?
Yeah.
If the quarts aren't dry, that's your station.
Yeah.
If the pots and pans aren't organized, that's your station, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. It's also your product, right? It's really which is so interesting about it. Like if you have like spotless glasses or you have like, you know, all the sauces are like spot on and seasoned perfectly and they're like refreshed and that's your product of a larger business. You don't get that in a lot of other industries, but in ours, it's like every single person has like their little business.
Right.
You know, you talked about like books and things like that, but do you guys, are there other things outside of books that you all do to continue to learn?
You know, we definitely go out and eat. We definitely talk about food. We definitely, you know, we have little jam sessions for the menu, you know, once or twice a month, you know, especially like right now as things are like, you know, moving pretty rapidly. Like we'll meet with all the chefs and sous chefs and like everyone will come with ideas and we'll kind of round table like, oh, I'm thinking about this chicken dish with a golden zucchini puree that we fold into rice and make kind of like a risotto or, you know, whatever it is. And then we kind of like flesh that out, especially for like younger cooks, like trying to take, you know, the vision. I always use like the A, B, and C. You know what I mean? It's like lots of people can do the A where they're like, I can think of this incredible thing. And then, you know, the B is the hardest part because you have to, you know, source, execute, cost, write a recipe that somebody else can also do. And then C, you have to put it on the plate and make it beautiful for the guest every single time. So I feel like A and C, a lot of times people have, but the B is like where, you know, like I'm not trying to plug Mise, but I am trying to plug Mise is like for us, like that's where Mise is like the most helpful because like, you know, we share it throughout all of our concepts. So we're like, oh, Chef Joseph has this amazing recipe for this Japanese barbecue sauce. I think that would go really awesome with this short rib. Jump on Mise, look at it. You know, if you make some tweaks, like let us know and we'll look at it together and then we'll make version 2 or whatever.
I totally agree, man. You know, it's funny. I have this like
I don't even know where I heard this saying, but there's a saying that it's way more important what you can do consistently every day than any one thing that you can do amazing, just one day.
Right.
It applies to everything, like even exercising, right? Like you could crush one workout and just like balls to the wall. But what's more important is can you do a similar workout every single day for, or whatever, like consistently over there. It's so true with food. I think and it's also something you learn over time, obviously, as a cook. I don't know how you think about this, but it doesn't really matter how sick of a dish you can create on your own once that looks beautiful. It's like, it's like the typical mistake you see when you see someone creating like a dish that has 72 steps to it and it looks really cool, but like nobody can execute it. Like how do you make food that can actually be executed the same way every single day by someone else other than you? That's what's really special and a skill that you have to learn as a chef.
It always drives me crazy when you see something on like the internet, right? Social media, whatever it is. And then you go to that place and you order that thing and it looks nothing like it. And you're like, what happened? Like, why would I came here for this thing. I thought it was going to be amazing. And like, it's not even close, sometimes, so.
Yeah. Well, what's worse is if you go someplace and this is what my number one reason for not going back to someplace, because I get so scared, is if I have something, let's just say I have something that's awesome. And then I come back and I want to order it again. And it's like totally different, not the same thing at all and doesn't taste good. I don't want to go back ever again because I'm scared what the next time will be. Because if I have something else that's good and I want to come back and order it, am I going to be disappointed?
Right, exactly.
That's like the most important part of any restaurant, maybe any business, is just, can you be consistent in what you're executing? It's way better to be consistently good than once in a while be incredibly amazing,
Right.
How do you help your team with that? Like, how do you help them? You have all these sous chefs and chefs and across all these different places. Like, what do you all do to sort of help maintain consistency and make sure that when you're developing a new dish, you're thinking through, okay, how are we going to execute this, at scale?
For us, we have really good leaders in place that have worked with us and they kind of understand, the score, if you will, they understand there's not necessarily a formula, but there's, all these notes that we have to hit in order to make sure that we're going to put this dish on the menu. And our menus change so frequently that sometimes a dish may change mid-service, presentation wise, because, when we plated it before service, we realized that oh, this is not attainable during service to make sure that it goes out in a timely manner. Let's do this like this. Let's do this like this. And let's make this quick kind of change in the moment so that it is executable, it is beautiful, and it is most of all delicious, So giving people the confidence to say hey, you know what? I realize now that this isn't going to work to their team and change it kind of mid service is something that we definitely try to instill in the team. And making sure that it works is the most important part, is that what the guest receives is delicious, beautiful, and it makes them want to come back.
How often are you changing your menu?
So on the job, every day at most places, we don't change the whole menu, but something will change because, if a farmer doesn't have squash, for example, right? Farmer Larry comes today and he's like, hey, I don't have the squash. We don't call up Baldor and say hey, let's get 10 cases of squash in here. We're okay, cool. What do we have? Let's pivot from squash and let's do, X or let's do Y. And so that kind of forces us to change the menu as well as be creative with, the landscape of the ingredients that we have.
Yeah. Yeah. It definitely keeps you on your toes. I remember we had this tempura squash, winter squash dish. It was a kabocha squash or red curry squash. It was a red curry squash tempura that we roasted and then tempura. And then there was this really cool grafted maple cheddar, grafted maple dip for it. Some chili peppers in there. Red curry squash was so random to get. You got it sometimes, but not always. It had a very particular flavor. And so sometimes we would get kabocha in. Sometimes we couldn't get any because the squash was still not it was taking a long to get ripe. We would use sweet potatoes. But every time, you have to do slight tweaks to the batter or to how you roasted it or how you fried it. It was a pain, man. really hard when you're just buying from farms and you're using those kinds of products. Is that like a daily or like a pretty consistent like dynamism of your menu where you're constantly sort of like tweaking a product because you're buying from so many farms?
Not a ton right now in this current season, because like right now we're in the like bountiful summer. Everyone has a ton of tomatoes. Everyone has a ton of summer squash. Like, so we're not in that scenario. But like last week, like we put a gazpacho on at Flora and Fauna, and we were using sun gold tomatoes because we really like the way that the like skin adds like a little tan into the gazpacho. And then, no one has sun gold tomatoes. So like, we have to adjust the recipe. We're using a different cherry tomato. Like, hey, this needs like a little smoked paprika now. Hey, this needs like a little bit more cucumber. Hey, this needs a little bit more olive oil to like get that richness that this sun gold tomato was giving to us. So like those kind of things, working with the ingredient and understanding that like, hey, the ingredient may be a little bit different today. And like, we need to taste it and make sure that it's going to give us the same result. And then when we don't get the same result, it's not like, oh, okay, like this is good. I made the recipe. We're good. Like someone brings it to the chef to try, and the chef's like, hey, like this needs a little bit more acid. This needs a little bit more, salt. This needs a little bit more, whatever it is, then we adjust from there, which will sometimes frustrate our cooks because we're like, hey, we have this great app. We have these Kindle Fires that are in the kitchen, and like cooks walk up and he's like, hey, I need to make, pimento cheese today. Hey, they shorted us on cheese. I have this much cheese. Does the recipe, and then we taste and we're like, hey, it needs a little bit more X. And he's like, I followed the recipe. I'm more like, yeah, like you did a great job following the recipe, but like we're gonna make sure that it's like exact every time. You know what I mean? So
yeah. So I want to kind of migrate over to something a little bit more personal. Like I said, so you have a baby coming in like 2 months now, I think. First kid, right?
Yeah, 60 days ish. First kid.
What are you nervous about? How you planning?
I'm nervous about everything. Obviously, I'm a big planner, as you know. We've met in person and talked about planning and executing, and I think we coordinated a breakfast together and at DC, and I was like, like, hey, like we're gonna do it this time. You're like, I'm not sure what time people are gonna show up, and I'm like, yeah, okay, we'll just wait till people show up and then we'll do it. You know what I mean? And I'm like, I'm a planner. There's someone installing some built-in cabinets in my living room right now so we can get a little bit more storage. An older house in Savannah doesn't have modern storage, if you will. There's a prep list. We're prepping meals to go into the freezer for when the baby comes so that, things are seamless and we don't have to think about that. Like just trying to eliminate the variables, just kind of like doing anything that we do is, there's variables that you can control and there's variables that you can't control, and controlling the controllables and letting the rest happen. So,
yeah, well, there's one thing about kids is there's a lot you can't control. That's one of the great reasons for Mise en Place when you're thinking about like preparing for a kid, is that the great thing about Mise en Place is, especially if you're somewhere where you're changing the menu every day or something like that, like as long as you plan for everything that you can plan for, you're prepared for all the madness that inevitably is going to ensue. And that is most certainly the case, when you're having a kid. I remember we planned, we got all these meals together. We got the room set up ahead of time, got all the little infant clothes and things like that. The food for us was fine. Everything else, just out the door, It's funny, the way I tell everybody is like, don't buy a lot of infant clothes because they basically wear the same shirt. We had like 60 pairs of like all these infant things, and like, they're, after a month, it's a different size anyways, but like, you get all this stuff prepared and then it's just, everything is a curveball, but it's exciting, man. It's exciting. Are you both taking off from work?
We'll both take a few weeks off of work.
Nice. How's she feeling?
Great. Opening a restaurant and being pregnant at the same time has been challenging, but she's bustling through it, doing good.
It's nuts. Yeah. It always seems to come all at the same time.
It always happens that way.
Yeah. Did you have like the room set up and everything?
We don't have the room set up yet now.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. You got about 6 months before.
Next month.
Well, about 8 months until you actually need a room. How do you think that your work is going to change after the baby's born?
I'll definitely have to be more structured in how I allow my time to be used. Because now I'll do anything at any time make it happen, that sort of thing. So I think like trying to organize my time so that I can be more effective during the hours that I need to be effective, rather than like waiting for someone to need me in a moment that I might not be available.
Yeah, for sure. How do you think you're going to change as a person and as a leader?
There will be more empathy, I'm sure. I feel like I'm pretty empathetic already, but a lot of my friends have been like, yeah, I just like things that were crazy important, the way that, this certain thing had to be forever, like all of a sudden didn't seem like that big of a deal. And I'm like, I don't know what you mean, like they're like, you'll have things that you're so passionate about that, may or may not affect, the guest experience. And then when you have the kid, you're like, that doesn't really matter anymore. We're good.
Yeah. By the way, what do you do when you're not working right now?
I like to ride my bike, run, exercise, that sort of stuff. Definitely go to the beach. We're 15 minutes from the beach, and that's a big relaxation point for me. So
nice. I promise there's a reason why I'm asking you this. When you look back on it, in a year from now, you can just see what you think. But I'm excited for you, man. And also just really grateful that we could find some time to catch up. I know we text, every once in a while, but I was glad to have you come on and just chat for a little bit. And I'm super excited for you to become a dad. And I'm excited to see how things change for you when that happens.
Yeah, I'm excited too.
Thanks for tuning into the Mies podcast. The music from the show is a remix of the song Art Mirror by an old friend, hip-hop artist, Fresh Daily. For show notes and more, visit getmees.com/podcast. That's GETMEEZ.com/podcast. If you enjoyed the show, I'd love it if you can share it with fellow entrepreneurs and culinary pros, and give us a 5-star rating wherever you listen to your podcasts. Keep innovating, don't settle, make today a little bit better than yesterday, and remember, it's impossible for us to learn what we think we already know. See you next time.